Let us bring in John Dickerson. He is CBS News chief Washington correspondent and, of course, the host of Face the Nation. John, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to begin with the president's remarks. Of course, we heard fire and fury, and then he seemed to double down on that, actually suggesting that perhaps those words weren't tough enough. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he doubled down and walked back because on the one hand, he said the words weren't tough enough. But then in the new set of red lines that he drew, it was more specific than what he'd done on Tuesday. What he had said on Tuesday essentially was if North Korea threatens the United States again, they will see destruction. And then they immediately threatened the United States and nothing happened. What he said on Thursday was if North Korea takes action against Guam, well, that's a specific thing, and it's more in keeping with traditional foreign policy. If a country attacks you, then you attack back. And so what the president was saying on Thursday was in keeping with the kind of traditions of foreign policy. What he was saying on Tuesday was a promise he couldn't back up.
Right, right. So we have heard from a number of administration officials on North Korea. We've heard from Rex Tillerson. We've heard from Secretary of Defense James Mattis, and they have been supportive of the words that the president used, though, you know, we heard Tillerson talk about the importance of diplomacy and being open to talking to the North Koreans. One of the challenges in this administration is finding a unified voice on a number of different topics. Do you think they are finding a unified voice here?
No, this is a reanimation of a traditional thing we've seen, particularly on foreign policy with the administration on an issue like Russia, where the president's public remarks have been quite warm towards Russia. He's been more critical of allies than he has been of an adversary, some people would say enemy, like Russia. But then U.S. policy towards Russia has been aggressive, either in Syria or with respect to NATO. So many analysts and even people inside the administration have said, watch what we do and not what the president says. And that is also the case here with North Korea. The president upping his language. But when you talk to people in the Pentagon and the diplomats in the State Department, they're moving along a diplomatic track. They are essentially saying about the president's words, you know, that's not what he meant to say, or you know, they act as if he said nothing and just are continuing along their path. So it's basically he's off saying what he's saying, and then the diplomats are working on their course as if he said nothing.
Yeah, we've seen this before, and usually the response is, well, you know, what the president said certainly doesn't help. But anyways, we're over here, but we're talking about some pretty bombastic language, and he's speaking directly to Kim Jong-un, who often uses bombastic language himself. Right.
I think that basically this is, at least those that I've talked to who are in the administration, the language isn't helpful, but they are not as alarmist as some of the outside commentators who worry about the president sort of stumbling America into a war with a series of kind of escalating rhetoric that then turns into action. So I think it's at the moment it's a bit of a diversion, but more a kind of message diversion than an actual impediment to policy.
Oh, well, that is good news. I want to turn to some domestic politics now. John, after tweeting out attacks to Mitch McConnell over the past few days, the president spoke about him during a press conference yesterday. Let us listen to what he had to say. We'll talk on the other side.
I said, Mitch, get to work and let's get it done. They should have had this last one done. They lost by 1 vote. For a thing like that to happen is a disgrace. And frankly, it shouldn't have happened.
So once again, the president not backing away from some of his tweets. What do you make of his criticism?
Well, on the one hand, he's kind of counterpunching. Mitch McConnell said essentially the president had set expectations too high about what could be done with health care and what the president could do. And then the president's doing a little bit of blame shifting, which is because he had come into Washington and said he alone could get health care passed. And so when it didn't pass, he's not going to say, well, I'll reevaluate my approach. He's saying it's Mitch McConnell's fault. The problem is they have a very narrow margin among senators in the Senate. If they want to do it with Republicans only, they only can lose a couple of senators. And that's really hard to do on a super complicated issue like health care or tax reform, which they are going to try and take up next. So The president is putting pressure on him. That's, kind of familiar and what he, I guess, can do. But it's not likely to change the minds of the senators who Mitch McConnell can't order to do things. Right. They are their own people.
Here's another thing that's a little awkward and uncomfortable, and we've seen the president do this with other lawmakers. He was asked whether or not McConnell should step down, and he basically said, bring that question up a little later on if some key items on the Republican agenda don't get passed. How do you think other GOP senators are reacting to that message? Like I said, we've seen him before put some heat on senators who he thinks are not being compliant enough.
Well, some senators will see it as kind of traditional bombast from the president, whose approval ratings are in the mid-30s, and they won't, they're not going to abandon McConnell, and they'll just move further away from the president if he's choosing to attack the senators, Republican senators. Now, there will be other Republican senators who themselves have essentially used McConnell as a foil. And the argument essentially to the base of the Republican Party is your leaders in Washington don't really share your views. And what they are saying are structural impediments are really impediments of the heart. They just don't have their heart in it. So they will, in fact, I think, if this continues down the narrative path that it's on, they might very well rally to what the president is saying. And then you'd have a real split that that would play out in the 2018 elections and in the primaries and where you wouldn't get a lot done.
Yeah, that doesn't sound so good for the party in general.
It would not be good for the party in general, because then it turns, then it gets into a really ugly fight about, well, it just gets into an extremely ugly fight.
Yeah.
And again, with a president who's not popular, the Republicans who are running in an off year need everybody to be on the same team.
Yeah, exactly. A Republican Party that I think is still trying to figure out exactly what defines the party and who defines the party. Is it the president or others? John Dickerson in Washington, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne Marie.
And Sunday on Face the Nation, John will talk with former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Leon Panetta, plus he will have a discussion with 4 mayors about issues most important in their cities. That's Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern and then again at 6 p.m. right here on CBSN.